This is week number 7. Day of recording is the 8th today, and I just finished work for the day. Um, and this past week, I've been drawing the one of the designs, and it's been accumulating since the middle of November. Once I started doing the measurements, and as the other logs implied, I was measuring and recording and making the proportions to be correct. This week was all about finalizing those measurements and putting some shades and, in the best of my abilities, finish it. As of today, there is about 20 more percent to go for the design. I've tested a lot of the shadows. I am extremely happy with the result. And as I was shadowing and creating the lights and the textures of the stones and all the environments around, I've been considering how much free I feel whilst designing with the graphite. Before, I would only do the outlines with the graphite and then implied some of the shades and then start with the painting and paint with the acrylics and different type of method and different type of freedom there. But when it comes to with the graphite, my hands leave exactly the marks and the motions that I want without having to depend on a brush. Yes, I would always use my fingers in my paintings and sort of try to smudge or blend paintings with them, but it feels completely different now that I've embraced and really focusing on the graphite aspect of designing the three dimensionality of the figure and the painting and everything that is within the composition, which which got me thinking how every object that I would have in this composition and in any composition to come, there's a lot of answers on the texture that is going to be presented on it. I found I found at least 10 or 15 ways that I could do an object or emotion, and the way that I would blend is different and every object has its own sort of idea and its own sort of, given that if it's a book, it's going to be blended in a different way than, for example, a face. Um, so I've been impressed with the progress so far, even though I would say I'm taking more time with it. I'm seeing genuine results of all the efforts that I was putting in, given that it took me, I wasn't working every day of those weeks, but it took me since the 14th of November, I would say, till now to finish the measurements and everything that I've been doing in Photoshop is reflected in the design and it's measured and it's proportionally correct, which was my goal. Given that everything is proportionally correct, everything looks really amazingly drawn and accurate, and every shadow and all the three dimensionality that I'm beginning to introduce is easily sort of presented. Given that if everything looks okay, then the design will be okay. Um, I've been thinking how people will be interacting with the composition a lot as I was shading and having time for my thoughts to unravel. Um, I've laid out the objects that I want to be visibly interactable, and then I've begun thinking on what I could put sort of behind the surface in a metaphoric state of how can I introduce a bit more story or something that is not easily distinguished, but can give sort of a hint that rewards someone who spends time, or I guess more time, in the composition that someone else would normally will do. And I've been finding sort of even in my previous log on how I could have the coordinates sort of imply something, or something of that regard of the person who finds it becomes sort of, it's a deeper understanding of the stonemason and the whole context of what's happening now. And in a funny thought that came from this is that, given that the stonemason now is towards the end of his life, he lived a substantial amount of years, um, and the tower in in a literal form is his living for at least 40 odd years. So I was thinking, imagine me having to put all the details that someone, for example, this character had achieved in 40 years. All the work, the knowledge, the ideas, the concepts. And it makes sense to me how much I want to introduce, given that, if this person lived here for around 40 years, and he wasn't really going outside, he was focusing on himself and overcoming his problems and whatnot, and his environment sort of reflects this. And how would someone who was living 40 years in isolation in a tower amongst his art and poetry and writing and whatever medium it might produce, how would that look? And honestly, it's very intriguing for me, because everything that I can place in the composition can be sort of a time capsule of who he was or who he is right now. So with this thought in my mind, going forward with every conversation, every detail that I'm putting in, I'm beginning to understand, okay, there is a lot of catching up to do when it comes to this individual, and how this individual is becoming into a fully fledged character. And most of the character development will happen in your exploration through the compositions and anything that you find around, because the story gives you the understanding of where everything is happening in a contextual way, of how this is sort of the overarching theme, and this is what's happening to be known to be happening, and anything in between is up to your interest and what sort of intrigues you through the compositions, which there lays another problem. Some of the compositions that I have are quite detailed in terms of the objects that you're going to be able to explore. And in that, it's beautiful in the idea that you can just click anywhere in a sort of funny way, and you would get sort of information of whatever nature. The idea is that visually, though, if you were to imagine right now you're in a room, and this room is in a complete disarray, and on the floor there is books, on the shelves there is like paper, uh, candles everywhere, complete chaos. Imagine this in a visual, and imagine how, if you were to come by out of no context in a random setting, you will feel overwhelmed. So the idea of overwhelming the viewers when they're experiencing a very complex composition is something that I've been thinking about. And if I can introduce it in a different type of way, the amount of details without having to overstimulate someone's eyes when they're observing a composition. And thankfully, in this composition that I'm finishing now, which is going to be done probably Monday or Tuesday, just to overstretch it to have a smooth completion, the next few sort of designs are quite okay when it comes to the amount of objects interacting and how it presents in the composition. But the three major designs that it's gonna spark all the other ones, especially the second one, the second chapter. That's when we're seeing the stonemason in his sort of quarters, where he does most of his art and whatnot. So that room has an extensive amount of objects and visual clutter that in when I did the design on Photoshop and I placed everything sort of in their slots, it looks okay. You know, it looks all right. But as I'm able to understand now how things are going to be happening through through graphite and me drawing them, I think the only solution that I see is introducing lots more shadows, sort of like obscuring most of the objects in shadow, but you could see them still, and then having only a few with the direction of the light to give this organic sort of feel of where everything is laid and how you would interact with each other. So how you would prioritize this sort of section of the room versus the other that is hidden behind shadows and clothes and any sort of obscuring substance, which is not really a substance, but in my mind, that's what makes sense. But I'm really really excited on the quality of the stonemason theme and the whole sort of front lines of both story, visual, and interacting with everything is gonna be in the best of my abilities. Um, Super detailed and put a lot of well, placed a lot of time behind every aspect in a conceptual and in a context way for it to coherently come into play. As soon as this design sort of like was the one that I was making this week, that is towards completion, was sort of usually I always leave the face in the end. You know, the major figure in the composition. I always leave the face to be the last because that sort of is my mark of now you've done everything that you sort of like. Some parts are boring, for example accounting for the tiles and making sure that every tile that I placed is correctly sort of angled and all that, which is rather boring versus me creating a hand or a face or a gesture. I prefer those. So I left very like me to leave the face towards the end. And when I've seen the face sort of be completed, and it's unlike anything that I've ever done. The amount of growth that I have done through my art and the concept of me introducing sort of, it is a statue that I've created, but at the same time, if I were to think in a stonemason sort of mindset, and this particular design is happening in the present, which means that he has sort of tempered with it as the years gone by and he kept it updated. In that context, the sheer amount of expertise and mastery that he was able to accomplish is something that I really want to bring forth in the compositions when they're relevant. For example, one of like his, let's say his statues that were done 30 years ago or 20 years ago, I want them to have sort of like a less, like the feel of time, right? How if you see your earlier work towards your present work, there is a change. It might be either better or worse, but there is an obvious change. And I want to bring that forth when it comes only to the figures, given that the environment is going to have, to the best of my abilities, a very cohesive sort of display. And I've been enjoying tempering with these ideas and really seeing all this effort that I've been placing coming into a conclusive sort of composition, which I haven't felt since my last painting in Flow the Mind. Given that yes, I've done some designs as I was traveling, but those one was straight from my head, sort of sitting down without any expectation and just letting it do its thing. But now having a concept, a theme, a direction, it's a complete different sort of effort that I'm placing. My schedule now that I have been sort of been consistently coming back to it, I'm able to say that the way that I work is that I wake up around 6 a.m. That's when sort of light begins to slowly accumulate from my window. So around 6:30, I I sit on my desk from the night before. I make sure that everything that I would need is placed on it. My sketchbooks, my pencils, the paper that the design is on, everything. And I sit down and I begin creating. Around 12, around noonish, I stop. I take an hour to eat anything that my lunch may consist of. Usually it's 30 minutes sort of food or along the context of that. So around 12 to 1, I take my break. And then towards 1 and 5 ish, I work towards the afternoon. At least that was my schedule for this week, and it's going to be what I would want to do. I would I would ideally want to push me working towards 6 p.m. So it's sort of like wake up at 6 and work till 6 p.m. Just because it's my level of interest. And usually throughout all these hours that I might be working, not all of them are completely productive. Some of them have sort of I do in an hour I might do very little work, and maybe in the next hour I'm gonna do all the work that I couldn't have done in the previous into the next one. It's sort of something that I've been explaining when I was painting on Flow is the concept of the second wind. It's when someone is running and the second wind sort of kicks in, and you're able to continuously run and keep up with your exhaustion and whatnot. The only difference here in my art is that I don't know when that will happen. It might happen as soon as I wake up or towards the end or in the middle. Usually, though, it usually happens before my lunch or just straight after, just because I get in the zone and I'm able to sort of coherently do what is needed to be done. But yeah, um, in this week that is coming, I am gonna be finishing the design. I think by Tuesday, this will be more than done. It's anyways sort of done. It's just me making sure that everything that I've want is there. The shadows are how I want them to be. I could easily just say it's finished and just move on, but I want to give the appropriate time to every design, given that every design is quite uniquely uh, presented. And then around Wednesday to Friday, I'm gonna start doing the measurements for the next design. Given that these are 6 designs that go together, let's call this one the praying design. It's a sort of a title that I placed on it, even though it's not what is what it's the actual title of it, but it's a way of me to categorize things. So I've done the praying one. It's gonna be done on Tuesday, and then the next one, which I titled temporarily "The Boy," it's gonna be commencing on Wednesday. That one has a different sort of challenge, which I'll see how much time it will take me to do it. But now that I have a schedule and I know how to do the measurements better, given that the scale was a big change for me. I'm used to painting big, and now I'm working in a at a 29 by 40 41, is it 41 cm? So it's a massive difference. Given that when I'm measuring things, I'm measuring, like, let's say, um, a hand, and if you were to measure it from your palm to the fingers and whatnot. So, in a bigger scale, the distance between your fingers might be like 1 or 2 cm, which is great because I can measure it very nicely and really have it sort of cohesively come to elaborate what I'm designing. But in a smaller scale, the distance between the two fingers might be like 0.3 cm, which is like nothing. When in your naked eye, it's nothing. So there's always sort of like coming back from measuring and being present with the design, which I had to sort of understand. And now I have a better grasp for about it, but I think it's gonna take more time. Regardless, it's going pretty well. I'm super excited about all the work that I've done coming into fruition and me being happy with it. And hopefully, now that I'm going to start the new design, I'm going to have um, more concepts and new ideas on how I can progress the interactive and tying up a lot of the story within the compositions front.